Greg thought betrayal would be loud, shouting, slamming doors, chaos. But when he discovered the truth, it was quiet. Too quiet. A forged signature, a secret account. And the woman he loved for 15 years? She wasn't just unfaithful. She was orchestrating his financial erasure right under his nose. What she didn't know is that Greg used to wear a badge, and he still had contacts. This isn't just a story about love gone wrong. It's about deception, patience, and a revenge so calculated it could only be planned by someone who once hunted criminals for a living. Stay with this story, because nothing is louder than the silence before justice strikes. I always thought betrayal would feel loud, like a crash or a scream, or the sudden shattering of glass against tile. But when I found out, it was quiet. So quiet, in fact, that I heard the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock in the hallway above the sudden numbness crawling up my spine. The day it started, at least for me, was a Tuesday. I remember that because I always took Tuesdays to work from home. The light from the big window in the kitchen hit the granite counter just right in the morning, warming the surface like sun on stone. It made the coffee taste better, or maybe that was just in my head. I had just opened the mail. There was a manila envelope, not the kind you get coupons in. Thicker, heavier. It had no return address. That should have been my first signal. But when you're not expecting war, you don't check the sky for smoke. Inside were documents, photocopies, pages with my name typed neatly on them, and then a signature at the bottom that looked almost exactly like mine. Almost. But the J curved. Wrong. And the loop in the G, my Greg, was too rounded, like someone tried to make it pretty. My heart didn't jump. It fell. The way a knife falls off the counter when you're washing dishes, silently, fatally. I read through them all once, twice. My hands were shaking, but not from confusion. No, I knew what this was. It was a refinance agreement on our mortgage. A second line of credit opened in both our names. Another account, personal, private, opened under mine alone. I hadn't signed any of it, but someone had. Someone I lived with. Someone I had slept beside for 15 years. Someone who smelled like jasmine in the morning and wore silk robes and read mystery novels at night with her glasses slipping down her nose. Someone I had once promised everything to. I didn't speak about it that day. I didn't even call her. She was out with friends, she'd said that morning. Book club or yoga, somewhere harmless, somewhere quiet and believable. I sat down at the table and just stared. I tried to feel the right emotion, but there wasn't one. Not yet. There was only cold. Not on my skin, but in my chest. As if the center of me had been unplugged, and whatever light had once lived there was flickering out. The documents stayed spread out across the table until the sun shifted, and the light left the room, making the ink look faded, like something ancient. Something over. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table, throw every glass in the sink against the wall. I didn't. I made dinner instead. Lasagna, her favorite. I set the table with cloth napkins and lit the candles, just like it was any other Tuesday, because it needed to stay normal. For now. When she came home, she kissed my cheek, poured herself a glass of wine, and complimented the smell. She told me about Kara's new dog and how someone forgot to mute on Zoom and said something embarrassing. I listened. I nodded. I smiled when I had to, and I watched. Her eyes never flickered. Her hands didn't tremble. If guilt was a ghost, it didn't haunt her that night. Later, when she was asleep, her back to me, I lay still and stared at the ceiling. The fan spun in slow, methodical circles, like a clock without numbers. I didn't sleep. I listened to the creak of the beams and the occasional passing car, trying to hear something beneath it all. Some small, honest tremor of regret. But there was nothing. And that's when I knew. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a lapse in judgment. This was deliberate. Calculated. Clean. The next day, I checked the mailbox again. I needed more. Evidence, confirmation, whatever you want to call it. I didn't have to wait long. A bank statement arrived. Again, addressed to me. For a joint account I'd never heard of. This one, oddly, was in both our names. But the deposits? They weren't coming from either of our jobs. There was a wire transfer, $18,000, from something called Beaumont Creative Holdings. I Googled it. Nothing real. No website, no presence. A shell. I looked at the check number, and then I saw it. The endorsement on the back, my signature. The same wrong J. The same rounded G. I didn't need a magnifying glass to know what this meant. She wasn't alone. There was someone else. Someone helping her. Someone who knew how to move money quietly, how to hide in the legal gray. Someone who knew just enough to think they were smarter than me. They weren't. I've always had a gift. Not for confrontation, not for theatrics, but for patience, for precision, for letting people think I'm the guy who doesn't ask too many questions, who shrugs, who trusts. I'd spent my whole life like that, reliable, quiet, steady. But they didn't know what I did for a living before I married her. I'd never talked about it much. She thought I worked in corporate compliance, which wasn't untrue. But I used to wear a badge, and I still had contacts. So when I say I let the FBI finish the job, I mean, I fed them the whole damn trail. Breadcrumb by breadcrumb, without anyone ever seeing the bag. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That came later. Right now, I had to keep pretending I didn't know. That I hadn't felt the world shift under my feet. That the woman beside me in bed wasn't, at that very moment, dreaming of ways to ruin me. Or maybe she was dreaming of him. I met Alina at a conference in Baltimore. I remember because it rained the entire weekend. And yet somehow she made everything feel warm. She was magnetic in that way. Sharp eyes, warm voice, a laugh that made you forget the drudgery of networking events and icebreakers. Was speaking on a panel about fraud detection in public contracts. She was in the audience, asked a question no one else had the guts to. We ended up talking for hours after. She said I had calm eyes. I told her she had a dangerous smile. We laughed, and that was that. Back then, I was still with the Bureau. Financial Crimes Division. Quiet work. Not the kind that gets you in the papers or action movie scripts, but the kind that puts embezzlers, shell company architects, and white-collar ghosts behind bars. I was good at it. Too good. Maybe, which is why I left. It wasn't some big dramatic moment. I burned out. You spend enough years digging through forged documents, following paper trails that lead to families torn apart by greed, and something in you gets tired. Not sad, not angry, just worn. So I took an advisory job in the private sector. Left. DC moved to Raleigh. Bought a modest house in a clean neighborhood with brick sidewalks and maple trees. It was the kind of place where people wave from their driveways and talk about roofing estimates like it's high art. I liked it. Alina moved in 6 months after we married. She brought color into the house, threw out my bland towels, brought in patterned rugs, filled the place with soft jazz in the mornings and spiced candles in the fall. She was kind, intuitive. Said she'd always dreamed of stability. I believed her. We had a good rhythm, at least in the beginning. Weeknight dinners, weekend trips to Asheville, lazy Sundays reading on the porch. She called me Steady Greg, said it like a compliment. I used to think we had the kind of marriage built to last. But even as I think that now, I wonder if I ever really knew her at all. The signs weren't obvious, not at first, but they were there. Little things, shifts in tone, eye contact that didn't hold as long. Too many texts with the screen turned away, smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. One afternoon, maybe a year ago, I came home early from a meeting and found her in the living room with a man I didn't recognize. He was sitting close. Too close. She said he was from the gallery, some art curator helping her with an exhibit idea. I didn't press. I should have. But that's the thing. About trust. Once you give it, you don't monitor it like a bank account. You believe it's there, growing quietly, gaining interest. You don't expect to find it drained one day, emptied behind your back. Looking back, I think she counted on that. She knew what I'd walked away from, the weight I'd carried. I used to joke I could spot a forged signature across the room. She used to laugh. So when I recognized what she'd done, the accounts, the false authorizations, the careful manipulation of our joint finances, It wasn't just a betrayal. It was an insult. She thought I wouldn't notice. Or worse, that I'd notice and still do nothing. I didn't react, not outwardly. The next few weeks, I played the part. Husband, supporter. The same steady Greg she had gotten used to. I even surprised her with dinner out one night. Our favorite Thai place. She wore the red dress I always liked. I watched her toast me across the table and wondered how long it had been since she'd meant it. That night, after she fell asleep, I got to work. I started small, pulling credit reports, tracking movement in our joint accounts, scanning for unusual withdrawals. I didn't need to hack anything. I'd helped build the tools that stopped this kind of theft. Now I was simply using them differently. Within days, I'd traced a pattern. 4 separate transfers from our home equity line. All routed through short-term holding accounts before disappearing into a corporate account that didn't match any of our known expenses. It was too clean, too careful, which told me someone else was involved. That's when I found him. Not his name, not yet. But his digital fingerprint. He'd logged in once from our home Wi-Fi, probably while I was traveling, used a VPN but not a good one. Amateurs always think the software is smarter than it is. He was bold, too. Accessing accounts in my name from devices he'd registered under hers. It was almost laughable. Almost. The twist came when I called an old colleague from the bureau, Jim Calloway. He owed me a favor or two. I didn't give details. Just asked him to run a name for me. Beaumont Creative Holdings. He called back within the hour. Shell Corp, he said. Just 3 months old. Owner registered as a Jerome Chase. That ring a bell? No. But the address did. It was the same building where Alina had her gallery space. I hung up, sat in the dark, and listened to the silence. And that's when it hit me. Not just that she was cheating. Not just that she'd stolen from me. But that she was confident enough to do it right under my nose. And that meant she didn't just love someone else. She trusted him. That hurt more than the betrayal itself. Still, I wasn't going to confront her. That's not how this works. Not anymore. You don't win a rigged game by flipping the table. You win by changing the dealer. And I was about to deal the next hand. She started sleeping with her phone under her pillow. It wasn't a big thing at first. She said she liked having her alarm close, claimed she was reading articles before bed, said it helped her disconnect from the rest of the day. I let it go, but habits change for a reason, and that one told me more than any slip of the tongue could. Alina was never reckless. She was meticulous, almost ritualistic. She folded her sweaters by color, lined her shoes like soldiers in the closet. When she made coffee, the sugar always went in before the milk. Every time. And yet suddenly she couldn't leave her phone on the nightstand. She was afraid I'd see something. That was clear. But she didn't know what I'd already seen. I'd spent the last 2 weeks tracking every digital footprint she left behind. Emails, phone records, even car GPS logs. I knew about her Wednesday afternoons in that small brick building off Hanover Street. She told me she was taking a pottery class. That wasn't a lie. There was a pottery studio in the same building. But she never went in. She parked 3 spots from the corner, same space every week, and walked through the side entrance marked private offices. That's where he was. His name, eventually, came up on a lease agreement linked to the shell company, Jerome Chase. Late 30s, startup consultant, formerly employed by a firm that specialized in creative financial optimization, a phrase that always meant trouble. I found a photo. He was average. The kind of man who'd probably compliment your watch while sizing up your wallet. Smiled too wide. Wore sport coats over t-shirts. A salesman without a pitch. But he had something she wanted. Or maybe he just was something she wanted. And whatever they were building together, it wasn't just romantic. It was strategic. I remembered a moment, about a year into our marriage. She was sitting on the floor in the guest room, surrounded by receipts and folders. Tax season. I had offered to help. She smiled, thanked me, but said no. I like handling these things, she said. Gives me a sense of control. I should have seen it then. The way she guarded details. The way she needed to be the one holding the threads. Back then, I thought it was independence. Now I saw the shadows behind it. She'd always been playing a longer game. Still, part of me wanted to believe I was wrong. That there was some other explanation. That maybe I'd misread the patterns, let suspicion twist the data into something it wasn't. Then one night, just after midnight, I heard her whisper. She didn't know I was awake. I'd rolled to the far edge of the bed, eyes half-lidded, body still. She was on the phone, facing the wall, one arm wrapped around her pillow. She whispered, "No, he doesn't suspect a thing." I felt the words slide into my spine like a wire pulled slow and steady. No, I didn't move, didn't speak, just let the silence settle over me like frost. Later that week, she asked if I wanted to take a weekend trip. Said we'd been disconnected lately. That maybe we should reconnect. Her words, carefully chosen. I agreed, of course. Smiled. Told her it sounded wonderful. Because the worst thing you can do to someone who thinks they're fooling you is let them keep thinking it. That weekend, while she packed, I slipped a small tracker into the lining of her laptop case. Just a backup. I already had access to her messages, to every file she stored in the cloud, but location data adds texture. Context. I needed to see the rhythm of her movements, when she strayed, and when she circled back home like nothing had happened. The trip was fine. Asheville again. Artisan shops, overpriced lattes, candlelit dinners. She held my hand in public, laughed at my jokes. I could almost believe she was still mine. Almost. But that night she fell asleep with a soft smile on her face, and I stared at her silhouette in the moonlight, wondering how many other lies had passed those lips, how many times she'd kissed me while planning my financial erasure behind the scenes. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It was surveillance. I remembered something else then, a memory that had been buried for years. When I was still in the bureau, we investigated a woman in Atlanta. Similar pattern. Married an accountant, built a life, seemed perfect from the outside. But behind the curtain, she and her partner had siphoned close to $500,000 through fake accounts. Her husband didn't find out until the IRS flagged them. He'd testified at her sentencing, stared at her like she was a stranger. Back then, I didn't understand how someone could be that blind. Now I knew. It's not blindness. It's faith, the kind you build slowly, over dinners, over shared secrets, over silence. And when that faith cracks, it doesn't crumble in a dramatic landslide. It dissolves, bit by bit. Until one morning, you look across the table and realize you're eating breakfast with a ghost. By the time we returned home Sunday night, I'd made up my mind. It was time to stop collecting evidence. It was time to start setting traps. Because this wasn't just personal anymore. This was federal. And I knew exactly who to call next. The first time I held a federal indictment in my hands, I was 27. It was a real mess. Contractor kickbacks, falsified invoices, 2 different counties involved. Took months to unwind. I remember how it felt to watch a man realize, in real time, that the paper in front of him meant the end of his life as he knew it. I felt that same weight. Only now, it was pressing against my own ribs. Except this time, I wasn't the one reading. The charges, I was the one writing them. I didn't have subpoena power anymore. But I still knew how to package evidence so it couldn't be ignored. My files were clean, timestamps intact, screenshots documented, IP addresses cataloged, account movement tracked. The breadcrumbs weren't vague. They led to a specific door, one she thought I'd never knock on. But I wasn't ready to report it. Not yet. Because I hadn't found why. The money I could understand. Greed is predictable. But this was more than theft. It was orchestration. She and Jerome weren't just draining our equity line. They were planning something bigger, and I wasn't going to make my move until I knew exactly what it was. So I kept watching. The next piece dropped when I intercepted a document she'd uploaded to a cloud folder she didn't know I could access. It was a letter, addressed to a bank, not ours, a private wealth firm in Chicago. It was a request to transfer funds, $412,500 to be exact, into a business acquisition account for a new LLC. The name of the LLC, Marrow Partners. The letter was signed by me. I sat very still after reading it. My body didn't move, But inside, every wire felt hot, like something vital was shorting out. She had forged me again. Not just for loans, not just for petty transfers, but for authorization on a major investment. This wasn't about siphoning money anymore. It was about replacing me entirely. My credit, my signature, my name. It would start with a clean business. Acquisition and end, likely, with bankruptcy. Mine, not hers. She'd claim I was complicit, that I had gone along with it, that I'd made decisions, bad ones, and she'd only ever been a supportive spouse. And when the cards fell, she and Jerome would walk away with the assets, protected, invisible. The plan was smart, devious, but smart. It was the kind of scheme you only see when two people have enough time and trust to coordinate every fine detail. And now, finally, I understood. This wasn't a story about infidelity. It was a hostile takeover of my identity. So I adjusted. Of course, I needed to make sure the law didn't just see what happened. It needed to feel it, to trace it so clearly that even the most sympathetic judge would call it premeditated fraud. And I couldn't do that alone. I called Jim again, my old bureau friend, and asked him for a name. Someone who still worked white-collar cases. Someone sharp, someone who'd listen. He gave me a contact at the Charlotte field office, Special Agent Dana Kessler. Mid-40s, no nonsense, deeply experienced in asset fraud. I'll give her a heads up, Jim said. But you'll need to go in with more than a story. You need to walk in with a case. I will, I said. Over the next week, I built a dossier. Not just screenshots, but behavior patterns. Call logs, travel receipts, cloud file metadata. I mapped out a timeline, complete with cross-referenced account activity and document changes. I even included photos, images of Alina entering Jerome's office, timestamps matching fund transfers that originated hours later. But I didn't stop there. I created a replica of the forged letter to the Chicago bank and had it analyzed by a forensic document examiner. The verdict? Consistent with prior forgeries. Same strokes, same pressure, same minor inconsistencies that made it not quite me. Then I did the thing I knew would put it over the edge. I let Alina see me looking worried. Just once. Just enough. It was a Tuesday again. We were in the kitchen. I let my fingers linger too long on a piece of mail. Let my expression shift, just subtly. She noticed. Of course she did. "Everything okay?" she asked, casual, but with that sharp undertone of someone checking a perimeter. I smiled, shrugged. "Yeah. Just something from the bank. I'll call them tomorrow." Her eyes flickered, just briefly. A microsecond of calculation. Then she smiled back. "Let me know if you need help." She was measuring me, testing the water, wondering if it was time to accelerate the plan or bury it. I knew right then she'd talked to Jerome. I knew because she left her laptop open that night, and while she was in the shower, I watched her draft the message. "We may need to move the transfer up." I didn't intercept it. I let it go, because now I had it on record. The next morning, I left early. Said I had an off-site meeting. Drove to the field office downtown instead. Walked through the glass doors and asked to speak with Special Agent Kessler. They brought me into a conference room. I laid out the entire thing. When I finished, she didn't speak for a moment. She just looked at me, stone still, then leaned back in her chair. "You do this for a living?" she asked. "Used to." She nodded once. "Well, it shows." Then she tapped the folder with a pen. "Let's build this right. Let's make it airtight. Because if what you're saying is true, she won't just go down for fraud, she'll go down for conspiracy." I met her eyes. "She thinks I'm weak," I said quietly. "That I'll walk away. That I'll let her erase me, piece by piece." "She's wrong," Kessler replied. She was, and soon she'd know just how wrong. It was almost surgical, the way she compartmentalized. During the day, she still made me coffee, humming some old jazz tune under her breath like nothing in the world was out of place. She still asked about my meetings, told me stories from her gallery about a client who got emotional over a painting, still laughed that soft, familiar laugh as if we were living the same truth. But behind her eyes, I saw the clock ticking. She knew something was shifting. Jerome had started pulling away from the shell companies. That's the first sign of a burner scheme in retreat. When they prepare to flee, they start erasing fingerprints, closing accounts, moving funds offshore, reassigning ownership to dummy trustees in low-transparency jurisdictions. I had Kessler watching. She and her team pulled warrants quietly. Their operation was discreet. No flashing badges, no subpoenas at the door. Just slow, steady documentation of every move, every transfer. They traced 3 separate LLCs, all feeding into the same slush account disguised as a consulting retainer through a Delaware corporation. Marrow Partners was the newest. But there were 2 before that. And they all had one thing in common. Funds, routed from accounts either jointly held by me and Alina, or forged entirely in my name. The sum? $712,000 and counting. But this wasn't just about the money anymore. Kessler found something else. It came from a flagged message, buried in a deleted WhatsApp thread between Jerome and a third party using an encrypted alias. We got access because Jerome wasn't as smart as he thought. He used an old phone number registered in his real name. Once we confirmed ownership, the legal wall fell. The conversation wasn't just about transfers, it was about timelines. Once the signature's in place, she can initiate the final move. He'll fold. Fold, like I was paper. Like I was a form they could press flat and file away. And then, worst case, he suspects, and makes noise. No proof, no risk. He's all gut, no muscle. I remember sitting in Kessler's office when I read that. I didn't speak, just stared at the page. The words burned into the screen like ash. They weren't just stealing, they were counting on me not to fight back. Because I wasn't loud. Because I wasn't reckless. Because I didn't yell or throw dishes or punch walls. Because I was steady Greg. The man who didn't ask questions. The man who trusted. Kessler tapped her pen against the table. Here's the real kicker, she said. That final move they're talking about? It's a business acquisition, legitimate on paper, funded through stolen money. They were planning to put the whole thing in your name and let it tank. Let the losses bleed through your credit, your tax ID, your future. And then they'd vanish, start clean. New identities, new states. Maybe even another country. Alina had a passport ready. We found the application she'd submitted online. A renewal expedited due to travel urgency. The flight she booked was for Paris. 2 weeks from now. A one-way. She never mentioned it to me. That night, I went home and sat across from her at dinner. She wore a silver necklace I'd given her for our 10th anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on me. She asked me how my day went. I told her it was quiet. She smiled, then bit into her salad. I studied her face. The faint crow's feet near her eyes. The soft line of her jaw when she chewed. She was beautiful. Still. But it was a weapon now. Softness as camouflage. Do you ever wonder, I asked, if we became people we don't recognize? She looked up, fork mid-air, then slowly set it down. What do you mean? I shrugged. I don't know. Just, when did everything start? Feeling like a performance? There was a beat, a half-second too long. She smiled gently. Greg, where is this coming from? Nowhere, I told her. Just a thought. But I watched her hands. How they tensed. She knew. She didn't know how much I knew. But she felt it, like cold water rising beneath a door. And she knew, instinctively, that soon she'd be swept under. 2 days later, Kessler called. We've got enough, she said. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering. You ready? I told her yes. But I wanted one thing first. I wanted to see her break, not in public, not in a courtroom, but at home, in private, in the house where she planned to bury me. So I wrote a letter, not legal, not official, just honest. I printed every account summary, every forged signature. I included a photo of Jerome outside that Hanover building, a snapshot of her walking beside him, and then I added a note, handwritten, in my real signature. I know everything, and so does the FBI. I left it on the kitchen table, then I drove away, parked 3 blocks down, waited. At 6:42 p.m., she came home. At 6:49, she saw it. At 6:52, she threw up in the sink. She didn't call me, didn't text, didn't try to explain. She just sat at the table, head in her hands. I watched through the neighbor's security feed, the one I'd asked to borrow for insurance reasons. Motion activated. Perfect angle. At 7:03 p.m., she packed a bag. At 7:17, the FBI met her at the end of the driveway, and she never saw it coming. She didn't cry when they cuffed her. She didn't scream, didn't resist, didn't beg. She just looked around once, briefly, like someone waking up in a strange room. Then she lowered her head and let them guide her into the unmarked SUV without a word. I watched from a block away, hidden behind the tint of my rental car. I didn't know what I expected to feel. Relief, maybe. Triumph. Vindication. Instead, I just felt empty. There's a moment when justice lands, not the cinematic kind, not the fireworks and applause kind, but the quiet, clinical kind, where everything inside you goes still. You realize you've won, and that no one will ever really know what it cost you. She was taken to a federal holding facility in Charlotte, processed, interviewed, read her rights. I didn't attend the arraignment. I didn't want to be in the room when she saw my name on the file. But Agent Kessler told me how it went. She was calm at first, she said. Silent, confident, until we showed her the packet. Then she got quiet in a different way. What did she say? I asked. Kessler hesitated. Then, she said, he wasn't supposed to notice. He was never supposed to notice. I nodded. That sounded about right. Jerome was harder to catch. He tried to run, booked a flight under an alias, used cash at a motel outside Atlanta, tried to transfer funds through a cryptocurrency wallet linked to an old offshore account. But the Bureau was faster. They picked him up at a gas station just south of Chattanooga. He was wearing sunglasses at night and trying to use a stolen debit card for cigarettes. Cowards always fall apart messily. A week later, I got a letter, handwritten. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Alina had always written, in neat, even cursive. She dotted her I's with microscopic precision. Inside were just 2 paragraphs. I never meant for it to go this far. At first, it was just money. A way to fix the hole we never talked about. You were always so still, so quiet. I thought you'd never notice, or maybe I wanted you not to. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I did love you, once, in my own way. No apology, no explanation, just a soft, controlled confession, like everything else she did. I didn't write back. I kept the letter in a drawer for a few days, then shredded it, because her love, whatever version of it existed, had come with conditions, with deception, with a trap under every "I'm fine." It wasn't love. It was convenience wrapped in intimacy, and I had spent too long pretending that was enough. There was one more confrontation, unexpected. It came 3 weeks later, while I was standing in the frozen aisle of a grocery store on a Wednesday night. A voice behind me said, "Greg." I turned, Jerome. Not in cuffs, not in a jumpsuit, in street clothes, gray hoodie, sweat beading along his temple, out on bail. He looked smaller than I remembered, less smug, more tired. "I wanted to talk," he said. "Just for a second." I didn't move. I didn't nod. He took it as permission. "She told me you'd never fight back. She said you were too soft. Said you were one of those men who'd rather suffer in silence than cause a scene." I didn't respond. He swallowed, looked down. "I didn't know you used to be Bureau. She didn't tell me that part." "Most predators don't ask about their victims' training," I said. He winced. "Look, I know you want me to rot. Maybe I deserve that. But she was the one who planned it. I was just the facilitator." That word made me laugh, quietly, bitterly. "You forged my signature. You used my name to steal my credit. You helped her disappear me. You think facilitator softens that?" He looked away. His hands were shaking now. "I was broke," he said. "I needed the money. She said you were checked out, emotionally dead. That you wouldn't fight for her. That she deserved more." "She said a lot of things," I replied. "Most liars do. There was a pause. Then he said, "I'm going to lose everything. My license, my firm, maybe even jail time." "Good," I said. He stared at me. I stared back. Then I walked away. Left him there, blinking under the fluorescent lights, standing between bags of frozen peas and a clearance bin of microwavable dinners. Because that's where his story ended. Mine wasn't over yet. Some mornings I still woke up expecting to hear the coffee grinder. For a second or two, the muscle memory of our life still lingered. The faint scent of her jasmine shampoo, the soft rustle of sheets as she shifted beside me. But then the silence returned. And it was cleaner now. Honest. It took months for the dust to settle. The legal process moved slower than the betrayal had. There were hearings, statements, asset tracing, testimony prep. Kessler kept me updated, always professionally, always direct. I respected that. Alina took a plea deal. 18 months in federal custody. Probation after that. Partial restitution ordered, though she wouldn't be paying it back anytime soon. Jerome wasn't so lucky. He'd violated bail terms, tried to interfere with witnesses, and lied under oath. His sentence was longer. In the end, the court saw what I had, a calculated scheme. Not a lapse, not a mistake, a decision. That made all the difference, but even after justice, something lingered. You don't come out the same when the person who knew the shape of your spine in sleep uses that trust to gut you financially. You don't emerge untouched after watching the person who once told you forever treat your name like a tool. For a long time, I didn't want to rebuild. I didn't want to start over. That phrase felt too light, too clean. What I needed was something slower, something real. So I took time. I left our house, sold it after the legal freeze lifted, bought a smaller place outside Durham, quiet street, fenced-in yard, one perfect tree in the back. I planted herbs in clay pots on the kitchen windowsill. Got a dog. Her name's Scout. She doesn't ask for much, just walks and presence. She sits beside me every evening on the porch like she knows I used to be someone else, and she doesn't need me to explain why I'm not anymore. The first real day of peace came oddly, on a rainy afternoon. I had opened an old email folder, the one Alina used to write love notes in when we were first dating. I hadn't read them in years. I told myself I was looking for closure. What I found surprised me. Even back then, between the poetry and the compliments, there were flashes of control, quiet remarks about money, comments on my choices, subtle nudges about stability and security that felt less like support and more like positioning. She'd been preparing me from the beginning, training me to stay still while she maneuvered. It wasn't that I missed her. It's that I missed the version of myself who hadn't yet been betrayed, and that version didn't exist anymore. What replaced him was slower, quieter still, but stronger, more precise. I'd returned to consulting, not full-time, just selectively, helping small firms audit their financial structures. Nothing fancy, nothing big. Just enough to stay sharp. A few weeks ago, I was invited to speak at a seminar, Fraud Prevention for Nonprofits. When I stepped onto the stage, I looked out at the crowd and felt something I hadn't in a long time. Not pride, not even confidence, just calm, because now I knew how to see things people tried to hide. I knew what manipulation looked like when it smiled at you from across a dinner table. And I knew, deep in my bones, that no one was ever going to use my silence against me again. Before I left the event, one of the organizers pulled me aside, a younger guy, early 30s, nervous in the way honest people sometimes are. He said, "You really got to the heart of it. You talk like someone who's been there." I just nodded. "Yeah," I said. "I have." On the drive home, the clouds began to break. Thin strips of sunlight cutting through the overcast sky like threads of something fragile and true. I rolled the windows down and let the air rush in. That night, I sat on the porch with Scout curled at my feet. I watched the stars appear one by one, and I thought, sometimes justice doesn't roar, sometimes it doesn't kick down doors or throw punches, sometimes it's just a man, sitting still, paying attention, and refusing to look away when everything inside him says do nothing. Sometimes justice looks a lot like patience, and sometimes patience is just another word for survival.